Good morning, everyone, and welcome to BPM's Nonprofit Education Series. My name is Daniel Figueredo. I'm co-leader of BPM's nonprofit practice, and we're thrilled to have you with us for today's exciting topic on demystifying ESG for nonprofits. This is a topic that's been top of mind for many organizations for a while, and we see our nonprofits out there at the forefront of ESG driving this as part of their mission and focus, and I'm thrilled to have a great panel for you today. Our co-leaders of BPM's ESG practice with us. Kristi Staley is one of our co-leaders. She'll be moderating today. She's our Director of Business Development. Sue Rim, another co-leader of our ESG practice, is a Senior Manager in our Assurance practice, and she'll be having a conversation with Mark Batemen, a great presenter that we have from Aperio, and a firm that's been investing in the ESG space for quite a while. He's the leader of their ESG and SRI research group within Aperio, and we're thrilled to have all three of you. Kristi, I'll go ahead and kick it off to you.
Thanks, Daniel. Appreciate it. Really excited to start breaking down ESG as it relates specifically to not-for-profit organizations. I've had the opportunity to work in the nonprofit world both professionally and personally for many years, and it was actually my volunteer experience and passion for mission-driven work that ultimately led me to the ESG world.
Kind of similar to Kristi, I've spent most of my career working at a nonprofit or auditing nonprofits, and also serving on a board. And through my time, working in the nonprofit space, I've been so inspired by all the important work done by nonprofit organizations, and that really, was kind of created that personal passion to, look more into and study more on the ESG space. And, you'll learn, hopefully this will be an informative webinar where you learn, a little bit more about ESG, but I think just overall, for me, ESG is just really a holistic view of looking at organization, not just focus on kind of the financial returns of, of a company. And so, that really aligns with kind of, my values and a lot of the, nonprofits values and the mission, and in able to kind of expand that to the greater public. And so very excited, and as Kristi said, we want it to be informative but also conversational, because as you learn, ESG is not something on your checklist of to-do that you can just check off. It's an ongoing conversation, ongoing discussion. So I hope that you can get something out of that from our webinar today.
Thanks, Sue. It's a real pleasure to be here. As Kristi and Daniel said, I'm Mark Batemen. I'm the head of ESG and SRI research for Aperio Group, which is an asset management practice inside of BlackRock. We were acquired by BlackRock a little over a year ago, and we manage separate accounts for individuals and foundations, and customize those accounts to the needs of the end investor. So for ESG and SRI, that means customizing the issue areas that we're evaluating in setting criteria for portfolio construction and management of the portfolio. Even though I work for an asset manager now, I still describe myself as coming from the research side of the industry. I started my career at an organization called the Investor Responsibility Research Center, which is best known for having done putting together lists of companies that were doing business in South Africa during apartheid, and moved on to then work at IW Financial. Both of those organizations have been subsumed into larger research firms, MSCI and ISS respectively. But it's that work of asking companies questions and filling out data sets and creating data dictionaries and creating methods for evaluating companies that I bring to my work in working with investors to customize criteria and build portfolios that can align with their mission and their values. And so from that comes what I guess is sort of my fun fact about ESG. I've been doing this for almost 30 years, and so have had an opportunity to work with a lot of clients, and we position ourselves in what I sometimes described as the values neutral space or agnostic space. It's not our job to say what should matter to an end client because different clients have different values. And the reality is that I have supported clients at every point along the political spectrum to align their portfolio with their values. And so you can imagine some of the issues where there's some real conflict and difference of opinion among those clients. But here's the surprising thing. Even on those issues, when there is really firmly held disagreement and therefore a different evaluation of companies as they need to go into a portfolio, there's an incredible amount of overlap on a lot of issues. Even when you're at the extreme left and extreme right of the political spectrum, there's a lot of overlap on certain kinds of topics. And so when we look at the polarization in the country, sometimes I'm heartened to realize that there is still agreement on a lot of issues, and that comes out when you're talking to people about what they want reflected in a portfolio and what kind of criteria they'd like to use to evaluate companies. So looking forward to today's conversation.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it. We're very grateful to have you here today, and I know our audience has a lot to learn from you. I've already learned a lot in our conversations to date. Before we dive in further and start exploring more specific topics, I'd just like to take a minute and try to establish a working definition of ESG. One of the things that's been very striking to me in conversations with colleagues and friends is that their knowledge of ESG tends to be all or nothing. So based on some of the responses from you when you signed up for this webinar, I think that might resonate in terms of ranging from the what is ESG all the way to maybe being seasoned experts on the topic. So in its most basic form, ESG is a specific set of criteria. It's the collection of environmental, social, and governance factors that can materially impact an organization. So to take it one step further, it's, as I mentioned, a specific set of criteria, and it's a measurable framework that takes concepts of sustainability and impact and adapts them to quantifiable performance indicators. This data is then utilized by various stakeholders from an investment standpoint, et cetera, as a tool to evaluate risks and opportunities broadly alongside financial factors and decisions. On the environmental dimension, climate risk is the most prominent example that comes to mind. Social, we think about employees, volunteers, the communities we serve, and boards are typically the focus from a governance standpoint. Many attendees here today might be familiar or have some experience with impact investing or socially responsible investing. Mark, I'd like to ask you how ESG relates to these other concepts of sustainable investing.
Sure. So when I think about ESG, I probably have the broadest possible definition of ESG that you'll find anywhere in the industry, because I really view that as the umbrella term that can be absent a specific value set. It's a list of issues, it's a list of topic areas. And then when you talk about SRI or sustainability or on in some other dimensions, even biblically responsible investing, you end up with a specific value set that is attached to a subset of ESG issues. And sometimes there is a subset of the big umbrella that I talk about as ESG that is also described as ESG investing. And that subset ESG is comes in a materiality framework where it's asking the question, what's the impact of the issue area on the financial positioning of the company, and trying to look at that in an integrated way. But that's just one slice and one flavor of all of the different kinds of things that you can do under the big umbrella of ESG.
Thanks, Mark. That's helpful insight, and I appreciate that perspective. I think the broader, the better when starting out the conversation here. So nonprofits are generally considered inherently altruistic. They're focused on making a positive impact in the world. I guess my next question would be, why should nonprofits pursue an ESG strategy? And how does ESG support organizations in furthering their missions? And Mark, I'd like to turn this over to you.
Sure. So, I mean, there are a lot of different reasons that that an organization might be interested in pursuing ESG. So I'll touch on a couple, and then I think Sue has some additional ones that she'd like to talk about. The first thing is, as you said, nonprofit organizations have an altruistic reason for existing. There's something they're trying to accomplish in the world, and if you look at all of the activities of an organization, every activity has some kind of impact on the world, and so that includes your investing. And so the sort of starting point question is often, are my investment decisions supportive of or counter to what I'm trying to accomplish in the world? And so we capture that concept in the question, are my investments aligned with the mission or values that I'm trying to pursue? And so trying to find a way for them to, at best, be supportive, but at minimum be not counter to the mission of the organization, I think is an important lens to look at your investments through. And we'll spend a lot of time talking about this throughout this conversation, but just because it doesn't have to all happen at once, and there's an opportunity to start and do what feels possible. But that's the first question: is it aligned? The second question is, in some ways, a larger sort of almost philosophical kind of question. Do you really believe that the way you're investing now fits with your understanding of how the markets are going to move and where these issue areas are going? For a lot of nonprofits where they're working on issues and they're potentially involved in advocacy or education to the larger community, there's a theory of change there, that they are seeking to change the environment, society, the marketplace, and the investment markets react to what's going on in society and the larger environment. And so there's an argument here that if you're trying to change policy, and you think you're going to change policy, are the companies you're invested in doing what's going to maximize their financial return in the environment where you're trying to change the policy, and are they moving in the same direction? And so that's where some of the materiality kinds of arguments can come in. I have said for a long time, just as an example, for an investor to not pay attention to climate change, they need to really believe two things. So this is to not pay attention to climate change as an investor. You need to believe two things. One, you need to believe that climate change isn't real. And two, you need to believe that the majority of the world's politicians believe that climate change isn't real. If you don't believe both of those things, it seems kind of silly to not be paying attention to climate change because you think it's going to end up having a material impact on regulations and therefore on companies. And that's going to affect the financial performance of your investments. And sort of the final point, in some ways, plays off of that. There's this myth that that ESG investing automatically means that you are sacrificing a return. There's a lot that goes into the return of an investment portfolio. It's not just what companies you choose, but it's how you assemble the portfolio. And you certainly need to do that in a thoughtful way, and your asset managers need to do that in a thoughtful way. but it's a myth that you are automatically giving up return just because you take these kinds of issues into account. And so that you can think about how you're going to construct a portfolio so that it's not true that you are automatically sacrificing return. And that also obviously needs to be part of your conversation about how you pursue these kinds of issues.
Great points, Mark. And I kind of want to bring in, COVID-19 pandemic, because that has kind of really changed, how we work and how we live. And so, really, I think the pandemic really kind of amplified this urgent need, or maybe the desire of people to tackle issues like the climate change that Mark talked about, and other social justice related issues. And these issues are not new; it existed for a long time. But I think now with the pandemic, there's definitely a growing awareness, among employees, candidates, board members, donors. And so, although traditionally, nonprofits have inherently the altruistic a mission, it's no longer enough to look at what the nonprofit is doing, but now it's more important to look at how they're doing. And that's where really ESG comes in. And, one practical thing is really being able to attract and retain talent, right? That's seems to be a topic that's, really important for all industries, all organizations across the board. And really, that changing priorities and kind of perspectives that brought on by the pandemic really focused more on, diversity, work-life balance, and kind of the work environment, for, all the stakeholders of the nonprofit. And, there was a recent research that shows that 70% of employees are looking for a purpose for work, right? In both in what they're doing, but in the working for a company that is in line with their own values and philosophy. And so, really having a strong ESG program or being able to communicate your values through ESG lens, will have definitely positive correlation, in attracting new talent and retaining talent, and increasing, employee, engagement and satisfaction, which ultimately, will lead to financial returns or some kind of positive financial results. And so, I think kind of combining that perspective that brought on by the pandemic, I think it's important for nonprofits to kind of revisit how you do things now.
So in a similar vein, are we seeing the same trends with donors as well? Are donors can we anticipate they're going to start incorporating this into their decision making?
Yeah, I think so. And, now a lot of the, the richest millionaires are millennials, right? And they're, definitely involved in philanthropy, and just, donors are recognizing, how, the nonprofits investment portfolio looks like, and how their DEI policy and their board makeup looks like. So those are things that we're starting to see more transparency and reporting that, that are being asked by the donors.
I'd also add, we're seeing a lot of movement on what I describe as values-aligned investing in donor-advised funds, where the donor is investing their own money on their criteria with the intent of giving it away. And I think that's just another indication that there's interest among the donor pool in these kinds of investment decisions. So I think there's real call on organizations to respond and demonstrate that they're taking the mission of the organization seriously and pursuing it through their investment strategies as well. And as Sue said, I think that will speak to the donor base.
Agree. Yeah, no, that's a great point. So given all these benefits and the trends that we're seeing, I'd like to ask Mark, what are some of the biggest challenges or barriers for organizations looking to adopt an ESG strategy?
So I think if you've been watching the space at all, you see that there's this huge explosion of options. And that's certainly true. A lot more finance companies and asset management companies are putting options out different financial vehicles. We've had mutual funds for a long time. We've got ETFs. They're separately managed accounts. There are all of these kinds of options for pursuing these kinds of strategies. But so your question was, what's the barrier? And I think the biggest barrier in many cases is the intermediary between the organization and all of those options that exist in the marketplace. So that's the financial advisor. Is the financial advisor, whether it's an internal financial advisor in the form of the finance staff in an organization, or an external financial advisor who's a consultant to that financial staff, are they what I describe as old school and saying, no, that our job is to maximize return however we can, and then we've got resources to be able to pursue program? Or do they have a more integrated kind of view of we can pursue return and look at what the impact on our mission is, and get the return to be able to then invest further in our programs? So those are sort of the two schools of thought, and I think in many organizations that old school of thought in the advisors, and again, either external or internal advisors, is the largest barrier to uptake.
Yeah, so Mark, in terms of starting this conversation with investment advisors on the intermediary front, what are some of the key questions that organizations should be thinking about or should look to incorporate in their conversation?
Sure. I think I divided into sort of two categories, and one is sort of the introductory question, so that you can assess how willing is the advisor going to be to work with you on these topics. And that's just a pretty straightforward question. Hey, I'm interested in looking at ESG investing, or whatever label you want to put on it. I want to find a way to further the mission of my organization through our investments, and want to look at what that looks like. And if the response from the financial advisor is, yeah, I can help you with that, then I'll share some follow-on questions to help you start that conversation with them. But if the response from the advisor is, oh, you don't want to do that, you should go make as much money as you can so that you can pursue your programs, my suggestion would be that you look elsewhere for an advisor. You need to find someone who is going to at least engage with you in the conversation. And that doesn't mean that I'm saying there's only one end point of that conversation, because there are clearly a lot of different ways that you can choose to further your mission with your investments. So it's not one size fits all, but you need an advisor who's going to engage with you in that conversation. Once you've found an advisor who's willing to do that, if you want to then get a sense of what they do and how they do it, some of the kinds of questions you might want to ask would include, so what sources do you have for ESG data? How do you think about ESG data? How do you think about impact? What does that mean? And we're going to talk about some of these things a little bit more as well. What's the advisor's theory of change that they think is applicable to your organization? And through that conversation, you'll get a sense of whether they can engage productively with you in the way you'd like to think about these issues and the kind of decision making that you want to make. In some cases, they'll be upfront and say, I'm not an expert, but we have people we can bring in who are experts who can help you. And in some ways, that may actually be the most helpful response because they're saying, look, I'm willing to learn alongside you as you go through this process. And if they're a good advisor for you otherwise, and you think have your interests and understand your organization, they can help you as you engage with other experts.
And Mark, internally, who should be involved in the conversations internally as organizations are embarking on this process?
So, I mean, my expertise is the ESG data and how to align those to values. But in my interaction with nonprofits, you sort of divide them into two primary groups internally, or at least I do. The finance and investment staff, and then the program staff. And the reality is, I think each of those groups has something to learn about what the other does and where their worlds actually intersect. And their worlds, at least partly, intersect on that question around what's the impact of investing on the mission of the organization. So I think there's a strong case for people from both camps to be part of a conversation about what does it mean to have mission-aligned investment. But I've worked with organizations that I sort of think of it in concentric circles. I've worked with organizations that continue to broaden which concentric circle they're bringing into the conversation. It can certainly be just the CEO. It could be the investment committee. It could be the full board. It could be board and staff. It could go out to include donors. And I've worked with educational institutions that have brought in student representatives to be part of the conversation. So I don't think there's any one right answer. I think it's how does your organization think about strategic planning, and if this weren't an investment decision that we were talking about, it was some other strategic initiative, who would be involved in that? And I think there's a case to be made that whoever would be involved in any kind of strategic initiative, planning or thinking, should also be involved in this.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Follow the same process for general decision making. Absolutely. So I'd like to ask you if you have anything to elaborate there, just in terms of generally starting the process, as well as ask you to elaborate a little bit on any specific challenges related to regulatory or compliance requirements and fiduciary duty for nonprofit organizations.
Sure, yeah. I wouldn't necessarily call it a challenge or a barrier, but anyone who is managing or running a nonprofit's endowment or investment pool, you're considered a fiduciary, and so you are bound by the fiduciary duties, right? And I'm not a fiduciary law expert, so I won't go into it, but in general, you are bound by duties, three types of fiduciary duties, right? Fiduciary duties of loyalty, right, which talks about, are you acting in the best interest of the organization, right, when it comes to investing. Duty of care or prudence, right? And that's, I think, part of that is, do you have the care and the skill to be able to do that? And going back to what Mark was saying, finding that right investment advisor who's willing to have that conversation with you and have a philosophy, right, in their ESG values. And then lastly, fiduciary duty of obedience, right? So if you have donor, restricted or intended funds, are you meeting those meeting the restrictions as the donor intended? And so, as nonprofits with large endowments with donor restrictions, you have to follow the MIFA rules. Private foundations are subject to the IRS rules of jeopardizing investment rules, right? And so, and maybe some nonprofits internally have a very restrictive bylaws or governing documents that might restrict you to enter certain investments. So these are not necessarily barriers, but something you definitely need to think about and use it as kind of a foundation as you are starting, to look into ESG investing and any kind of risk that you take on.
All right, Mark, getting into specifics a little bit more, what are some of the ESG implementation strategies that organizations can look to adopt to align their investment portfolio with their mission?
Sure. So I think this applies more broadly, but I'll use the specific example of the tools that Aperio talks about when we're meeting with an organization. So we talk about there being really 3 primary tools to align an investment with the mission or values of the organization. And they're not gonna sound revolutionary when I mention them. You just may not have heard them in this kind of presented in this kind of way. The first is to identify any what I call bright line exclusions. So those things that just don't belong in the portfolio because they're counter to the mission. And I add, no matter what else might be positive about a company. So as an example, if you have a healthcare organization that has said, among other things, it really cares about diversity, but they also say, but we don't want to invest in tobacco. It doesn't matter if the tobacco company has really outstanding diversity policies and has a really diverse board of directors, really diverse senior management, wonderful diversity policies, and does equitable pay reports and just does everything you could potentially want on the diversity side. You don't want to invest in tobacco. And so that company is ineligible for the portfolio, even though on a topic that you are really trying to lean into with diversity, it has all sorts of wonderful things. So that's what I mean by bright line exclusion. Criteria that means it's ineligible for the portfolio no matter what else might be positive about it. The second tool that we use is what we refer to as tilting towards a better average company. And this is where there are not bright lines. It's taking a number of different issues that may be important. So imagine an organization that says we care about both environment and human rights. And we then talk about how you're going to evaluate those 2 things for the company, for companies, and you come up with a single score that's an incorporation of both environmental issues and human rights issues. And then you construct a portfolio that intentionally overweights better scoring companies and underweights lower scoring companies. But notice it's still possible to have lower scoring companies in the portfolio. It's just that they're at a lower weight than you might have in the benchmark index. So if you calculate a weighted average score for a benchmark index and for the portfolio that is constructed on your behalf, you'd have a better average or weighted average company in the portfolio than you do in the benchmark index. So this is tilting towards better. But again, not bright lines. If there are things you don't want in the portfolio, it's important to establish those as exclusionary criteria. Those are both portfolio construction techniques. The third bucket that we have is what we use when once the portfolio exists, and this is the active ownership bucket. And so here it's a question of I own these companies, I'm a partial owner of these companies through the shares. How do you continue to express your mission and values? And you can do it through proxy voting. What kind of statements are you making about running the company as a part owner of that company? And that can certainly include how you vote on social and environmental shareholder resolutions, but it can also include how you vote on election of directors or CEO pay, all sorts of issues that can reflect your values as the proxies are being voted. And then the final piece of active ownership is really leaning into that even more and saying, I'm not just going to vote proxies, but I would actually like to file a shareholder resolution and put a question before all of the other shareholders that expresses the views of my organization and that I think the company should lean into. And so there are lots of people who work in that space and different ways that individual beneficial owners can be the filers of record. But those are additional ways of expressing the values of the organization and trying to move what's going on in the marketplace at a specific company.
Thanks, Mark. That was a very helpful overview. I know a lot to digest there, I'm sure, for folks that are not familiar with general investment strategies. And two, from an internal standpoint, how do organizations go about incorporating ESG in terms of their operations?
Yeah. And maybe I can go back to kind of the original definition of ESG and kind of give you a little bit more kind of practical example. So, as you know, E stands for environment, and whether or not your organization is involved in environment-related issues or cause, every organization has some kind of ecological footprint, right? And so you do make an impact in some ways, right? And so kind of considering that, I think right now a lot of the organization, as we kind of go through the end of the pandemic, possibly having discussions about renewing their office space. So, in that conversation, you can definitely incorporate some of the ESG, principles, right? So that might include looking at your remote work policy, right? That it's really necessary for employees to commute to the office. And if you're, evaluating a new office space, looking at is it a green building? What is the recycling policy? And so those are kind of practical things related to environment that you can consider and incorporate in your discussions when you're making that decision. S is social, and for me, just generally, that's your relationship with all your stakeholders, right? And so do you have a diversity, equity, and inclusion policy or trainings for management, right? What is your employee compensation philosophy, right? And also including social is actually cybersecurity, right? And risk, we've been talking about it, but even more, and probably now most immediate and may possibly have the most material financial impact or risk that any organization faces today. And so, what is your governance and oversight policies and procedures in ensuring kind of reduced risk around cybersecurity? And then G, governance, right? Looking at your board diversity, right? And then, does your, board and your organization really reflect and represent the community that you serve? So kind of looking really internally in every decision point, and I think Mark touched on it, every strategic plan or objective or mission that you're developing, you can always incorporate the ESG lens in that conversation.
And so how do organizations go about communicating how they are pursuing ESG strategies?
Yeah, and then currently there's no requirement, even for public companies. SEC is coming down with more, additional disclosures, but there's nothing required by law in the US, at least, that requires you to report on any of these ESG metrics. And so, I think in the nonprofit space, probably the higher education is kind of the leader in reporting and communicating. And a lot of the universities do have a sustainability reports that they do publish to the public. And a lot of that, I think, is driven by demand from the students, kind of the millennial mentality, and the reporting could include a variety of things. I think for higher education, you see definitely investment portfolio, the asset allocation, You know, it could include air and climate, you know, their building, the diversity, and kind of access to, you know, the admission and resources. Those are some of the things that we see for higher education in a separate sustainability report. But I think for a lot of the, you know, nonprofits who are starting their journey, I think the key is really identifying what is really important for your stakeholders and kind of weaving that into the story that you already have. I think nonprofits have a great story, you know, whether it's communicated through a website, to the annual report, or just your conversations with donors, but kind of, you know, being able to kind of weave that story into, you know, everything that you're already doing as part of your strategic planning. I think it's important.
Thanks, Sue. Mark, do you have anything to add specifically related to investment disclosures?
Yeah, so people often ask, so what's the impact that you can have with a public equities portfolio? So the reality is you're trading in a secondary market, and so you're not changing the specific world by having that impact. But one of the things that I talk about that is impact that you can have is you become an organization that is setting investment criteria, and you become part of the whole sphere of organizations that are setting that investment criteria. But how do you communicate that, the fact that you've done that? And I think some ways the best way to do so is to actually publish your investment policy statement. Share with the world the criteria that you have set, so that asset managers who are interested in your business can look at it and see what kind of criteria, so that companies who are looking at, well, what are nonprofits doing, have a way of finding it and exploring what kind of criteria are investors setting, so that your peer nonprofits can look at it and say, oh, that's an interesting idea. I hadn't thought of that issue in that way. That's something we should look at. You can have a huge influence on the conversation by sharing the way you're thinking about these issues, the way you're implementing them in your investment criteria, and the linkage that you see between your investments and your mission. So my encouragement would be that you be public about your investment policy statement and about the ESG criteria, or again, whatever label you want to put on these kinds of decisions within that document. We're going to start seeing more and more questions from people about these issues. So I wouldn't necessarily hold my breath that that constituents won't be interested in the relatively near term.
Thank you, Mark and Sue, very much for this very thoughtful introduction to ESG. Certainly a lot, I think, for folks to digest, and it sounds like in beginning the conversation where a lot of organizations are starting with the investment advisor is a good place to start, and then begin the conversation internally. Mark, Sue, I'd like to just take a minute and ask you both kind of for a couple key takeaways here to leave our audience with, whether it's something we've discussed or something new that you want to remind them. So Sue, maybe I'll start with you.
There's no perfect investment portfolio. There's no perfect organization, and that should not be the goal. But I think the goal should be really kind of move in that direction. That is really aligned with your mission and your values and your intention throughout the organization, and looking at it really, as I said earlier, holistically in all aspects of the organization to be able to embody that value. And I think starting the ESG journey or starting the conversation doesn't have to be a separate thing. All organizations have a strategic plan and talk about their mission and objectives. So really incorporating the ESG lens through those discussions, I think will make it less daunting and more meaningful in incorporating it throughout the organization.
And I'll just pick up on that and say it really is about starting. Don't wait for the perfect, and that means don't wait for the perfect data. Don't wait for the perfect financial vehicle. Don't wait for the perfect conversation inside your organization about what criteria are and that everyone agrees on absolutely everything. Find some way to start the conversation. Find some way to do something concrete with your investment so that you can say, this is now even a little bit more aligned with our mission as an organization than it was before we started. And then the data will continue to get better. The options will continue to get better. The conversation internally will get better as you start it and you learn. And so at Aperio, we talk about it being a journey. It is not a fire and forget kind of situation. So do something so that you're a little bit better tomorrow than you are today. And if you're just constantly thinking in those terms, then it'll be amazing what you're able to accomplish.
Looks like we do have a question from the audience. I'd like to go ahead and ask our panelists here. And the question is, how does one reconcile how a company might rate high in one category like E, maybe low in another category like G? In other words, how do companies like Tesla and Meta get included in an ESG portfolio? It's a great question. Mark, do you want to take that maybe?
Sure. So this is why we've got 3 different tools that we talk about in terms of aligning your portfolio with your values. If governance questions or data privacy questions are are critical issues for you, you could very well draw a bright line and say if a company fails on these criteria, then it's excluded from the portfolio and you can end up with Tesla out of your portfolio. If, however, you say, you know what, there's good and bad to every company, I'm willing for it to sort of average itself out and think of all of the companies I can potentially invest in on a comparative basis. And what I'm looking for is better companies across the full range of issues where the issues are averaging out compared to all other companies where the issues are averaging out. You might end up with Tesla in your portfolio. If it does end up in your portfolio, then you have access to the active ownership pieces where you say, okay, I'm investing in you because there are some things I like, but there are also some things that you're not doing well that I want you to be better at. And the proxies are going to be voted in that vein. You're potentially going to file shareholder resolutions. So you invest in and you try to make that entity better. But this is why it's important to ask the financial advisor and the asset manager, what are your data sources? How are you evaluating companies? How in the specific context of a specific portfolio process do the data get combined into a score? What's the portfolio construction technique? What are the active ownership options so that the right combination of those things can be found to meet the way you, questioner, think about those issues and the question that you asked.
Thank you so much to our presenters, our panelists, Kristi, Sue, Mark. We appreciate all your insights that you've provided us today. And please join us for next month's event, which will be presented by me and fellow colleagues on our tax side on trends in philanthropy. It'll be on the 21st of July. We'll cover the spectrum of philanthropic tools that funders use and that are available to them and some of the accounting and tax implications. So thank you again for joining our nonprofit education series, and we'll see you next time. Take care.